Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating chapter, synthesizing the incredibly distinct and honestly radically different historical journeys of East Asia's two major powers, China and Japan. We're going to look at how these two nations, starting from totally different places, navigated the massive disruptions of the 19th and 20th centuries.
Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap for this chapter. We'll be covering 1. Two empires, two paths. 2. The Western challenge. 3. Japan's rapid modernization. 4. China's communist revolution. And finally, number 5, the historian's craft. Let's dive right in.
Part 1. Two empires, two paths. To really grasp the modernization of East Asia, we have to set the scene in the early 19th century and look at the board before the pieces really started moving.
We have a stark contrast right out of the gate here. If you were a betting person back in the year 1800, you absolutely would have put all your money on China. Why? Well, China was the dominant regional power. The Qing dynasty seemed completely secure, sitting right atop this massive empire, and they were the heir to a long, unbroken tradition. But then, on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, you have Japan. Japan just appeared to be this small, isolated island nation, pretty much locked away from the rest of the world. But, history is full of surprises. And as we'll see, their very different internal structures ultimately dictated exactly how they responded to the outside world.
Which brings us to part 2, the Western challenge. Because within just a few decades, that entire status quo was completely shattered by the disruptive arrival of Western colonial powers who were looking to expand their influence and, most importantly, their trade.
Now, this perfectly illustrates the triangular trade, which was basically the economic engine behind all this disruption. You see, the British had a massive balance of trade problem. Britain had this huge demand for Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain, right? But Western goods simply weren't finding a market in China. China really only wanted payment in silver. So, to solve this, the East India Company started growing opium in India, sold it into China for silver, and then used that very same silver to buy tea and silk for Britain. It was an incredibly lucrative, but totally devastating economic loop.
And the aggressive expansion of this opium trade, well, it didn't just drain silver. It completely drained stability. When Britain actually used military force to expand this trade, it sparked the First Opium War. Looking at the sheer chaos of naval conflicts from this era, it's clear how this war ultimately undermined the ruling Qing dynasty. It threw China into absolute turmoil and completely shattered any illusion of Chinese invulnerability.
Now, while China was really struggling to cope with this colonial challenge and internal civil war, Japan took a very different trajectory. So let's look at part 3, Japan's rapid modernization.
Japan, of course, had its own direct encounter with the West. The arrival of American Commodore Perry forced a massive political shift. But rather than collapsing under the pressure, Japanese society actually mobilized. By 1868, a movement had forcibly removed the old military rulers, the shoguns, from power, and completely restored the emperor as the central political figure. They even moved the capital to Edo, renaming it Tokyo, which literally means the Eastern capital.
And from that 1868 restoration, the speed of Japan's transformation is honestly breathtaking. They rapidly built an industrial economy and a modern nation-state based on capitalist principles. By 1894, this newly modernized Japan actually defeated China in a war. This was a massive psychological shock, especially since China had historically been the source of Japan's own cultural ideals. And if that wasn't enough to shock the global order, in 1905, Japan went on to defeat a major European power, Russia.
But we have to understand, this rapid capitalization also fueled a dangerous imperial expansion. Japan justified building its empire as a way to resist Western domination and, quote-unquote, liberate Asia. Ultimately, this drive culminated in the catastrophic violence of World War II and their defeat by Anglo-American forces. What's absolutely crucial to grasp here, though, is the aftermath. The post-war U.S. occupation actually initiated the rebuilding of a democratic political system. Japan successfully rebuilt its economy from the ground up, emerging by the 1970s as a massive global economic powerhouse. It's a stunning arc of rapid rise, catastrophic collapse, and just incredible rebirth.
Which leads us to part 4, China's communist revolution. Returning to China, their path to removing inequalities and rebuilding national strength took a vastly different form. For them, the answer to the crisis of modernization was full-blown revolution.
To really understand this revolution, we have to look at the ground reality. The collapse of the old order, combined with foreign invasion, just utterly destroyed the lives of ordinary people. rural China was facing two overlapping nightmares. Ecologically, you had massive soil exhaustion, widespread deforestation, and devastating floods. Then, socioeconomically, the peasants were being absolutely crushed by exploitative land tenure systems, overwhelming debt, and a severe lack of modern technology. The conditions were basically a powder keg, totally ripe for massive systemic change.
To survive a blockade by their political rivals, the communists undertook the famous Long March. When you trace the geography of this event, it's just staggering. We're talking about a grueling 6,000-mile relocation to a new base in Yan'an. But this wasn't just a retreat, it was a crucible. During this massive march and in their new base, the Communist Party developed their programs, carried out land reforms, and built a deeply committed social base among the rural poor, the very base that would eventually sweep them into power in 1949.
Once they were in power, the drive to completely remake society continued, eventually culminating in the 1965 Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, which was launched by Mao Zedong to counter his critics. He utilized the Red Guards, who were mostly students in the military, to campaign against old culture, old customs, and old habits. The defining feature of this period was that political ideology, specifically being a committed communist, officially replaced rational debate and professional expertise. Professionals were literally sent out to the countryside, and public denunciations became the everyday norm.
So we've just covered a massive amount of incredibly complex history, which naturally begs the question, how do we actually know all these intricate details? That brings us to our final section, Part 5, The Historian's Craft.
It all really comes down to the fundamental building blocks of history, primary sources. Scholars construct history from the actual materials left behind by the people who lived it. But, history isn't just a simple list of facts. As this quote highlights, historians critically evaluate these materials. And because of the natural ambiguities within them, different historians might use the exact same piece of source material to advance completely contradictory arguments. Because of this, history speaks to us in incredibly varied, diverse voices. And when it comes to exploring the history in this chapter of East Asia, we are so lucky to have a rich, deep tapestry of these voices to draw from. We rely on official dynastic records and ancient historians like Sima Qian, who was literally writing over 2,000 years ago. We also have the outside perspectives of European travelers like Marco Polo and the meticulous accounts of Jesuit priests. Fast forward a bit, and we have modern analysts, like the highly influential Japanese scholar Naito Konan, who brought journalism and modern Western historiography to the study of China. It is only by weaving all these diverse sources together that we get a richer, deeper picture of these modernization paths. Which brings us to a final thought. The famous medievalist Marc Bloch once recalled a young boy asking him a very simple yet incredibly profound question. "Tell me, Daddy, what is the use of history?" Well, when we look at China and Japan, two nations that started in the very same region, faced the exact same Western colonial shock, yet chose such incredibly different paths to build their modern states, we aren't just memorizing dates. We are learning how societies respond to existential crises. So I'll leave you to reflect on this question. How does understanding these diverging paths of modernization help us comprehend the global balance of our world today? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history around you.